In the autumn of 1967, in the quiet Bavarian town of Rosenheim, something began happening inside a law office that nobody could explain. It started slowly, with details easy to dismiss. A light flickering, a fuse blowing, a phone ringing with no one on the line. Small things, the kind of things you chalk up to old wiring or a bad week. But the small things didn't stop. They got worse, and before long, the law office of a man named Sigmund Adam had become the most talked about building in Germany. What happened in that office over the following months would draw police investigators, electrical engineers, physicists from one of the most prestigious scientific institutions in the world, and one of Europe's leading parapsychologists. It would be filmed, measured, and documented. Witnesses would sign official statements, and nobody, to this day, has produced a satisfying explanation for what they saw. This is the story of the Rosenheim Poltergeist. Rosenheim sits in the foothills of the Bavarian Alps, about 60 kilometers southeast of Munich. In 1967, it was a prosperous market town, the kind of place where things worked the way they were supposed to, where people went to their jobs in the morning and came home in the evening and did not expect the furniture to move on its own. Sigmund Adam ran a legal practice there. It was a professional environment. Staff arrived on time, handled correspondence, answered phones. The office occupied a building on a central street, equipped with the standard technology of the era: fluorescent lighting, a telephone switchboard, a photocopier. Nothing unusual about any of it. At first, the staff noticed that the fluorescent tubes in the ceiling were going out more frequently than they should. Not one or two. All of them repeatedly, sometimes within hours of being replaced. Engineers from the local power company came out to examine the circuits. They found nothing wrong. The tubes kept failing. Then the fuses started blowing. Again, no clear cause. The power supply was checked. The wiring was inspected. Everything appeared to be functioning within normal parameters. The disruptions continued regardless. The photocopier began leaking fluid without being touched. Developing fluid pooled on the floor with no mechanical explanation. The machine was serviced. It kept happening. Then the phone started behaving in ways that made no sense at all. The office had 4 telephone lines. All 4 would ring simultaneously, with no caller present. Calls would be cut off mid-sentence for no apparent reason. But the strangest development was what the billing records showed. The office telephone account was being charged for an enormous number of outgoing calls to a speaking clock service, the German equivalent of dialing a number to hear the current time read aloud. When the phone company pulled the records, what they found was staggering. In a period of 5 weeks, the speaking clock had been dialed roughly 600 times from Adam's office. In one 15-minute window alone, it had been called 46 times. The mechanical dialing system of the era made that rate of calls physically close to impossible, but the charges were there in black and white. Adam had not authorized these calls. His staff denied making them. And all the phones in the office required a key that only Adam himself possessed in order to make outgoing calls. By October 1967, things had escalated further. Every light bulb in the office went out simultaneously with a loud bang. Not a gradual failure. All at once, the electric company was called back. They could not account for it. Local police were brought in. Adam filed an official complaint, citing potential fraud and unusual electrical usage. Officers came to the building, spoke to staff, and began documenting what the employees were reporting. What they heard was enough to prompt them to stay and observe. What the police witnessed while present in the office did not have a straightforward explanation. Objects moved, lamps swung, drawers opened on their own. A heavy filing cabinet slid across the floor with no one near it. Officers who had come expecting to find a simple case of workplace mischief left having signed statements describing things they could not account for. Word spread quickly. Rosenheim was a small town. Journalists arrived. The story was picked up by local newspapers. a report aired on German public broadcaster ARD. Within weeks, the office of a provincial lawyer had become a national news story. Letters poured in from around the country. Self-proclaimed experts and ghost hunters wrote offering their services. But among those who responded to the case was someone considerably more serious. Hans Bender was a professor and the director of the Institut für Grenzgebiete der Psychologie und Psychohygiene in Freiburg, an institute dedicated to the scientific study of psychological phenomena at the boundary of conventional understanding. He had spent decades investigating claims of paranormal activity with a rigorous, empirical approach. He had seen a great many cases he could explain. Rosenheim interested him enough to travel there in December 1967 and begin a formal investigation. Bender brought equipment. Cameras were installed throughout the office. Voice recorders were set up. Instruments were placed to monitor electrical fluctuations. He wanted data, not anecdotes. He also brought colleagues. 2 physicists from the Max Planck Institute, Friedbert Karger and Gerhard Sicher, joined the investigation. The Max Planck Institute is not a place associated with the paranormal. It is one of the foremost scientific research organizations in the world. The involvement of its physicists gave the Rosenheim case a level of scientific credibility almost no other reported poltergeist incident has ever received. What the investigators documented over the following weeks was remarkable. The cameras recorded lamps swinging violently from their fixtures, not gently, not in a way consistent with drafts or vibration, but with significant force, swinging in arcs that the investigators could not attribute to any environmental cause. A framed painting was captured on film rotating around its hook on the wall. A heavy filing cabinet, weighing considerably more than any person could easily push, was filmed moving across the floor. The electrical monitoring produced equally puzzling results. Surges of energy were recorded in the building's circuits with no identifiable source. The power supply to the building was cut entirely at one point during the investigation, with the office running on an independent generator. The disturbances continued. Karger and Sicher, approaching the case as physicists, were unable to attribute the phenomena to any known mechanical or electrical cause. They submitted an official statement to that effect. Police officers who had observed events in the office did the same. Then, Hans Bender noticed something. The disturbances were not random. They followed a pattern. Specifically, they followed a person. Her name was Anne-Marie Schabel. She was 19 years old. She had recently taken a job at Adams' law firm as a secretary. And the investigation's data made one thing unmistakably clear. The phenomena occurred when she was present and stopped when she was not. When Anne-Marie walked down the hallway, the overhead lamps would begin to swing in her wake. Bender documented this directly on camera. The intensity of disturbances in any given room correlated with her proximity. When she went on vacation, the office fell quiet. When she returned, the activity resumed. When she was finally dismissed from the firm, the disturbances ceased entirely. They never returned. Bender interviewed Anne-Marie at length. What he found was a young woman under significant psychological stress. She had recently gone through a painful, broken engagement. She was unhappy in her job. She described feeling frustrated, trapped, and emotionally overwhelmed. She had no explanation for what was happening in the office. She denied any conscious involvement. Bender's conclusion drew on a theoretical framework he had spent years developing. He proposed that Anne-Marie was what researchers in parapsychology call a poltergeist agent, not a person who deliberately causes disturbances, but a person whose concentrated emotional distress manifests externally as physical phenomena without their knowledge or intent. The concept has a formal name in the field: recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. The theory holds that under conditions of extreme psychological stress, Certain individuals may generate a form of energy capable of affecting physical objects in their environment, not through deliberate effort or conscious control, through something closer to an involuntary discharge. The mind under pressure finding an outlet that bypasses the body entirely. Bender had seen versions of this pattern before in other cases. What made Rosenheim different was the scale of documentation. The correlation between Anne-Marie's presence and the phenomena had been captured on film and confirmed by independent witnesses across multiple professions. The case, in Bender's view, was the strongest evidence for RSPK he had ever encountered. The telekinesis framework raises questions that are not easy to dismiss. The phenomena at Rosenheim were not subtle. A filing cabinet that moves across a floor under observation does not move because of a draft. A painting that rotates on its hook in front of a camera does not rotate because of atmospheric pressure. If the disturbances were physical, and multiple credible witnesses maintained they were, then something caused them. In the absence of mechanical or electrical explanation, the mind becomes the only remaining candidate. And if the mind is the cause, then what happened in Rosenheim was not a ghost story. It was something potentially more unsettling, evidence that human consciousness, under specific conditions of distress, can reach beyond the body and act on the physical world. That is a considerably more uncomfortable proposition than a haunting. A ghost belongs to someone else. RSPK belongs to the person standing in front of you. The Rosenheim case did not end without controversy. A skeptical journalist named Piet Hein Hubens later criticized Bender's investigation for omitting a significant detail. At some point during the investigation, a police officer present in the office reportedly caught Anne-Marie in an act of fraud, deliberately causing one of the disturbances herself. Bender did not include this in his published accounts of the case. That omission matters. It raises the possibility that some portion of what occurred in the office was manufactured, either by Anne-Marie or by others. It undermines the integrity of Bender's reporting. It does not necessarily explain the full scope of what was documented, including the electrical anomalies recorded before Bender arrived and the physical events captured on independent instrumentation. But it introduces a degree of doubt that the case cannot fully recover from. Annemarie Schabel herself appeared on German television and denied having any special abilities. She maintained that she had not caused the disturbances deliberately. After leaving Adam's firm, there are reports that she did experience similar strange occurrences at a new workplace, though not as severe. She eventually married and, by all available accounts, lived a normal life. The activity in Sigmund Adam's office ended when she left and never resumed. The building still stands in Rosenheim. The law firm no longer operates there. Whatever instrumentation was installed during the investigation is long gone. The case exists now in records, in film footage, in the signed statements of police officers and physicists, and in the published and disputed writings of Hans Bender. What it does not exist in is any resolved, agreed-upon explanation. The electrical disturbances produced energy surges that the power company could not account for. The phone calls to the speaking clock occurred at a mechanical rate. The equipment of the time should not have been capable of producing. The physical movement of objects was observed simultaneously by multiple independent witnesses across a period of months. The correlation between one person's presence and the full scope of that activity was documented in real time. Poltergeist cases are common enough in history that they have their own literature, their own theoretical frameworks, and their own long-standing debates. Most do not survive rigorous scrutiny. Most collapse when examined closely, attributed to mischief, psychological disturbance, misremembered events, or simple fraud. Rosenheim is different, not because it is proven, it is not, but because the people who investigated it were not credulous amateurs. They were a trained parapsychologist, two physicists from one of the world's leading scientific institutions, and uniformed police officers who signed legal statements describing what they witnessed. The documentation they produced has never been fully explained away. The footage has never been definitively debunked. What happened in that office in 1967 remains, by any honest accounting, an open question. The conventional explanations do not account for all of it. The paranormal explanations cannot be verified. And the one person at the center of everything, a 19-year-old secretary from a small Bavarian town, took whatever she knew with her when she walked out the door. The lights stopped swinging the day she left. They never swung again. Subscribe to Paranormal Depths for the strangest and most compelling cases from around the world.